what I was basically acknowledging is that in the focus of the legislation and the focus of the autism task force is that all the focus was on early intervention with kids. And I'm acknowledging that no, there's a much bigger picture that needs to be addressed. But I also, I guess, what I'm trying to convey is just because this task force goes out of existence at the end of this year, things don't stop there. It's not like there's no opportunity to do things. I think the fact that you are organizing and organized to a certain level already, and you all have stories to tell based on your own experiences, that there's a lot of value that I would encourage you to take advantage of and expanding the conversation. That's all I'm saying.
Does anybody else got to say something?
Zach?
What are the chances, or how long would it take to convince autism task force right now to have people on the autism spectrum, particularly adults, to be part of the board for their opinions, to be to have their say?
Everybody can have their say. To be part of the task force in October, I think the chances are none, because that's not going to happen. What I'm suggesting is that doesn't mean that's the end of the story. No one's going to pay attention. I think that there are issues that you are raising, and it'd be appropriate to raise them in our last meeting on the 5th, which is this week. And the critique that you're giving me, which is, look, this is great what you're doing, but it's really incomplete, and you're leaving out a lot of stuff that needs to be considered. I think that can be made part of the task force record, and I think that's worthwhile.
There's a lot of disassociation that happens in adulthood. I mean,
yes.
And so we spend all of this money building this up to a certain level, and then we get to dissolve in society, and really, it isn't very effective.
I think those are good points to make. You do know, I think maybe Andy knows this, but normally we do testimony at the end of our meetings, but this week we're going to do it in the middle at noon. So I'd encourage you to be there and to testify, because I think, as I say, I think you're raising good points that should be and can be made part of the record.
Dave?
Andy, you two were discussing earlier possible conflicts of interest, and I was really bubbling to get something out there, but of course I had to withhold until our Q&A time now. And your perspective, Andy, you felt fairly positive about there not being any conflict of interest issues.
None that we have proof of.
Not, well, I'm not quite as optimistic as you. And there's clearly a difference between conflict of interest and potential conflict of interest. One is actual and one is potential. But with these members on the advisory committee, you have providers, and oh yes, are they making much more money now that insurance is covering this stuff, because the client base has now gone from this big to this big. So there's that. There's also the idea that if you increase qualifications of providers, as Dr. Barnhart, I'm sorry, is it Doctor or is it Mr.? Mr.
No,
Barnhart.
Mr.
Okay.
Well, I mean, technically, I'm a doctor of jurisprudence, but everybody knows that just means a lawyer. So
oh, okay.
Yeah, that's
okay, Mr. Barnhart, JD, Esquire. But Mr. Barnhart mentioned that the dilemma between qualifications and having enough providers with those qualifications to meet the demand. So in terms of finances, I think providers are going to be wanting to lower qualifications because of the high qualifications, less providers, less money comes in. Lower qualifications, they can make more money. And also, when it comes to who actually advocated for passing this bill, Autism Speaks was involved. They certainly made money off of being a part of, we are advocating for this, give us your donations. California Association for Behavior Analysis was a part of this. This benefits, again, behavior analysts and treatment providers in terms of money, absolutely.
Very true.
There were also, yeah, in terms of, but we're talking about conflict of interest. So money, is that going to be, and I think it is in some cases, coming over the actual interest of the people involved, the autistic individuals. And then third, and I was contacted directly by one of the big parent health insurance groups before SB 946 was passed. They were making money off of going around teaching people about what the rules were going to be, how to get in under the insurance and stuff like that. And I was directly contacted because I had a support group, which is now a nonprofit organization, dealing with these kind of kids. And she was very uninterested in my group because there was no money available for her. So I think money is definitely a conflicting interest, and I think it does exist, whether intentionally or maybe more subtly.
How would you get people to perform these functions if it's not, you know, financially attractive to them?
Well, that's not what I'm arguing for. I'm arguing for, I think what I sort of pointed out is that people are going to be making decisions about the care and treatment of autistic people, not
Yes.
based on the well-being of those people,
Well, that's
but
another
based
topic.
on the finances.
Yeah, right, okay.
Or at least in part based on the finances. And that's where my concern is. And one of the other issues that I know I spoke with Andy about, this kind of ties into it, is that the issues that you mentioned, Mr. Barnhart, and I'm CEO of a nonprofit organization. We have 150 parents on our mailing list. We were a small group for 3 years. We've been a nonprofit for a little over a year and a half now, or a little over a year. And I'm getting it from parents too. These issues about transferring services, and these issues about paying for now insurance fees, because families who once were getting completely free regional center services are now forced to move to health insurance and are now paying these co-pays and deductibles. Now, these things were never mentioned by anybody, as far as I'm aware, and I was pretty involved in this, when these bills were being advocated for by Autism Speaks, California Social Behavior Analysis, all FEET, which is a parent group, all these other groups. And I kind of feel like parents got the shaft, because they're all stuck in this situation now where they're having to pay for this stuff. And no one mentioned this before. And I think that's where a huge conflict of interest shows through as bright as the sun can shine. Because don't tell parents about these negatives, because we need this to get passed so the behavior analysts can make more money. So Autism Speaks can push its agenda, stuff like that.
Well, can you bring evidence of that nature to the meeting so that we can deal with it, you know?
Absolutely. Well, I think the advisory committee is already aware, as Ms. Barnhart said, of the issue of co-pays and transferring services.
We are now, but I became director on August the 11th of last year, and SB 946, I don't even think it had that number even at that point, but it was pending then. You know, it was a question of whether it would, no question it would pass, but whether it would be signed by the governor was a big issue.
Sure. And
I do know that in discussions, there was an understanding that this diminution in the role of regional centers would come about. I mean, I know that was being discussed at that time, before it actually passed. Now, I don't think that I don't agree with your conclusion, though it's certainly a reasonable one for you to arrive at, but I don't happen to personally believe that that's what was the motivating factor. You know, I think you genuinely had a whole lot of parents who really felt it was essential that autism be included among all the other ailments that the health insurance plans cover. And we've had those discussions in the past over, you know, whether a certain surgery should be included, like bariatric surgery is an example, occurred started about 10, 15 years ago, whether that should be the covered service or not. So you always have these discussions, and I think there was a real fundamental belief on the part of a lot of parents that, damn it, treatment for my child for the autism spectrum disorders that they're afflicted with, because that's the perception, should be included in my health coverage just as much as flu shots and surgeries and you know, new hips for old people, all those kinds of things. And I mean, I think that's really what motivated them. That's my personal view. I don't think, but you're correct. That certainly somebody was paying attention to the fact that once you make these the private and health insurance responsible for paying for those services, that it has a concomitant effect on what regional centers have to do.
Jordan?
Hey, maybe a bit off topic from the current line of discussion, but I've been wondering, what do you think of the idea of subsidizing the price of a tablet computer used as an alternative augmented communication device?
You're talking about iPads and so forth?
Yeah.
Yes, as AAC device.
That is being discussed. I don't know how that's gonna, I know that is being discussed. I don't know what, I'm thinking at some point, if you're asking what would my department do about it, if there were a demand made essentially by a parent that should be included, because there appears to be some significant utility in working with particularly young kids. Well, not only young kids, because I have seen some data affecting even full-grown adults. It enhances their ability to communicate.
Some of the luminaries of our movement are these.
So I think that is an issue that's going to be resolved at some point. It'll come up in our department. It'll come up in the form of somebody demanding it, health plan denying it, then going up for independent medical review, and we'll see what the result of the independent medical review is. You know what that system is that we use? If there's an issue as to whether something is medically necessary, it could be a surgery, it could be a medicine, it could be a device.
Therapy.
Aromatherapy, right. Yeah, virtually anything that you can conceivably imagine that you would say is medical. And there's a dispute over that as to whether it's medically necessary or not. Then under California law and in most states, that question is not submitted. I mean, for years and years, those things were always disputed in court, and you had lawyers and judges arguing about it, and neither lawyers nor judges knowing anything about medicine. So they developed a system instead in which you have a review by physicians, and it's supposed to be physicians who are skilled in that area, and that's with whatever specialty may be pertinent, and that's the independent medical review system. If the question comes to us, we submit it to them, they make a decision, and then we enforce the decision. That's how independent medical review works. So, in answer to your long-winded way of getting back to your question, I suspect that somebody is going to submit that from independent medical review, some time, in the near future, I would guess.
There are already, AAC devices can already come through health insurance. I don't think, I think they're more of the, not the iPads, but more of like the ones
Yeah,
that
the
are already.
dedicated devices, yeah.
What's that?
Yeah.
Yeah, the dedicated to that kind of stuff, like the Mayor Johnson and those.
Yeah, but they're becoming outdated very fast compared to the apps that'll just keep learning and learning.
That's certainly a perspective to look at. But there's also, from my understanding, that there's also another way to go about getting these devices, and it might be easier because iPads at $600 or $700 are a lot cheaper than a $4,000 specifically designed AAC device.
Huh, I didn't know that iPads were actually the cheaper option there. I always seen them as, well, it seems like most people see them as real luxury devices, but I didn't know that it was that much cheaper than a dedicated device.
Oh, much, much cheaper. But it may be limited to the iPad and what it can do as well.
And I guess that depends on the applications that are developed.
The dedicated AAC devices not only have software, but they also have the way that you input on the devices is specifically designed. The iPad is not designed necessarily for a person with an atypical need. So these AAC devices have special kind of buttons, the way they're arranged. I mean, some of these, and I've tried one of these before, it's super cool. They have a laser that looks at your eyes and you can move the thing on the screen with just your eyes and pick your words that way.
So I tried setting one of those up, but I just couldn't get it to work.
Right, so there might be certain advantages that a dedicated AHC device would have over an iPad, but I think it's a very, very good discussion to have because the cost is huge difference.
So, we, because we have, costs that range from the $500 iPad to the $4,000, eye tracking dedicated device, is that going to present some trouble for subsidizing these devices, especially in this particular economy, in terms of the state alone, let alone the federal government?
And that's quite another factor is that you have the federal government undertaking a role that they haven't had in the past on January 1st of 2014. The only thing, I'm not trying to be cute here in response, but in terms of even a costly device, even the cost of it, if you weigh that costly device up against professional services in which you're paying for professional services, that costly device becomes a lot less costly after a while when you compare it to what you have to be paying for 40 hours of service a week, or even 20 or 25 hours of service a week. So this is something I know absolutely nothing about. So, but if you were to assume that these assistive devices could, in many cases, get you significantly better results than 20 hours of training in a week, then that device begins to look a lot more affordable.
I don't think that kind of training and those sorts of devices are mutually exclusive.
They're not.
They're not. I don't think
Absolutely
the
not.
devices are meant to replace that sort of training. All they do is provide, a level of comfort for people who are uncomfortable with it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So you have like a range of users, but I don't know. It may reduce the amount of training simply because you're not spending that much time trying to get the client to speak. But it's not a matter of mutual exclusivity. It's it's a matter of there are all these tools out there, and let's try this one. Does it work or doesn't? And so you pick all the ones that work and all the ones that don't. That's going to be different for every kid, but it's not like everybody's looking for that one tool and then they're just going to stick with that one. If some people think of it that way, but they learn pretty quickly when it's not exactly how it works. So it's not You know, so it's not something that necessarily cuts down on your service hours. Lex?
Looking forward, what would your recommendation for us be if we were less than tickled by the task force recommendations?
Oh, you mean the recommendations
Yes,
come out and you think
yeah.
they're totally insufficient or,
Well, not
or
totally.
not totally, but say inadequate?
I don't think we'll find that. But what I think we might have concerns here or there, you know, for instance, the autism community evolved. That seemed to be a consistent among us that we would prefer there have been somebody from one of us
Mhm.
to be represented there.
I think it's a point you're certainly entitled to make.
Okay, going forward, will there be other organizations that we might want to have early input into?